right, welcome into what will be the final live stream of the 2025 calendar year. Hope everyone had a great Christmas holiday, happy holidays, happy and safe New Year as well. Again, last live stream this particular calendar year, and then we'll obviously get back into it in earnest in 2026 as draft season gets underway. So, this is the second half draft show. I'm your host, Juice, flying solo this evening. Been a bit of an inconsistent stream schedule over the last few months. Lot of different things happening, a lot of moving parts, but excited about spending a little time with you this evening to talk about all things football. All things football. There's a lot of information again with the inconsistent scheduling of these streams. A lot of ground to cover. Won't be able to touch on everything, but certainly want to discuss the college football playoff a little bit, some of the implications, what happened during the first round, as well as the fact that the NFL season is starting to wind down. As far as the regular season is concerned, looks like there's going to be a new guard in the playoffs to a certain degree. Some teams that we anticipated would be there, not going to be there. A couple surprises along the way. So I want to kind of touch on that, what that means as far as team needs are concerned for the teams that are just kind of on the outside looking in as we get into draft season. And the draft season will, again, as I mentioned, begin in earnest in just a few short days. So with that said, I want to start with the college football playoffs. And it's been interesting. Obviously, a lot of conversation around, the committee and who's in, who's not, whatever the case may be. No real surprises to my mind in the first week, right? Your group of five, James Madison, offense played fairly well, but of course they were outmatched by Oregon. Tulane certainly was out of their depth. They did not have the horses in order to compete with the Power Four, I should say, Power Four program. What I thought was kind of interesting, obviously, I believe his name is Summerall, the head coach of Tulane. Now will be the head coach of the Gators. I know Drew is excited about that. They let him coach that game. They let him coach that game, which I thought was interesting, right? So on the one hand, you think about it from the perspective of you want to do right by your players, by your coaches. You know what I mean? You take on a new job. You want to see things through, but also just because of the unique nature of college football and the way recruiting works and that whole process, you want to get those types of things underway as soon as possible, generally speaking, right? And it almost seems, especially in the era of the portal, right? Previously, when players would have to lose a year of eligibility, it decided to transfer, and a lot of players would show up for a head coach. I think more and more these days, obviously with the advent of NIL, there are different implications, and certainly I think more often than not, coaches or rather prospects are committing to these schools for position coaches more so than a head coach, right? Looking for that best opportunity to develop and find their way into the NFL. So I thought it was interesting, and I don't necessarily agree with it. I think they should have just kind of let him go, let somebody coach on an interim basis. I don't know that the outcome would be any different, but certainly perhaps a more competitive contest associated with Tulane in the college football playoff. And then my Canes took care of business, man. It was ugly. But great job by the defense. Managed to keep an explosive Texas A&M offense under wraps. I think that goal line stand at the end of the game to seal it really demonstrated how far Miami's defense has come compared to last year, which it was just atrocious. But to be able to get off the field under those circumstances in a hostile environment on the road was certainly impressive. So that leads us to the next round of college football playoff matchups. And let me pull that up for visual purposes. So you don't have to necessarily look at my mug the entire time here, but give me just a second as I pull the college football playoff bracket up. And I want to talk a little bit about the matchups, some keys to the game in my mind. And then, of course, draft implications, right? What that means for the NFL draft, that's really the bedrock, the core of what we do here at Couch Potato General Manager, of course, the second half draft show, the namesake of this live stream. So Certainly want to kind of touch on that before we talking about individual team needs at the NFL level. All right, here we go. We'll give ESPN the nod here. I have very mixed feelings about ESPN these days, but for the purposes, maybe I'll find a better visual. Hold on a second. Let me try NCAA.com. I don't know that that's a better visual. Nah, let's go back. All right, appreciate you guys' patience here. All right, allow me to share screen. I didn't mention the Alabama Oklahoma matchup. Um, a pretty one sided affair. Certainly, Ty Simpson kind of got back on track. He's, we talked about, I alluded to, the NFL draft implications, and you talk about, the quarterbacks, and obviously entering the 2025 college football season, we're thinking, a bevy of signal callers could end up in the first round of the 2026 NFL draft. And none of those guys that we had pegged, at least here on this platform, are in the conversation, right? Whether they just underachieved in terms of their performance, or they're were subject to injury, what have you. It's just upside down, right? The Klubniks of the world, and the Nussmeyers, and Drew Aller, and so on and so forth. Even some guys that we thought were maybe on the fringes who could find their way, climb up, maybe a John Mateer. They just didn't get it done. And as you can see here, Bama beats Oklahoma in the first round of the college football playoff as well. Ole Miss, whom, talking about that coaching situation, of course, matched up with Tulane. They said, Lane, go ahead. You want to go to LSU? Go ahead. Go, you know what I'm saying? Like rip the Band-Aid off. Rip the Band-Aid off so people can turn the page and focus on the task at hand. At least in my mind, I think that makes the most sense. But I'm talking about those quarterbacks, right? So, of course, Oregon has Dante Moore, Alabama Ty Simpson, and Indiana, who obviously is the number one seed, gets the bye. They're going to face Alabama on the 1st, on New Year's Day. They have Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman Trophy winner. And the way I have these quarterbacks stacked up is 1 Mendoza, 2 Dante Moore, 3 Ty Simpson. And there's a pretty significant gap, at least in my mind, between the first 2 and Simpson at number 3. I do not. I have Simpson on the fringe of the first round, just because obviously quarterback is the most important position, and considering the fact that we thought we would have a fairly deep class of quarterbacks that could turn into potential franchise guys, didn't turn out that way. Certainly based on the 2025 college football season, you want to give Simpson a little bail, shoot him a little bail. I think what separates him, or rather the top 2, more so than Simpson, is how they deal with pressure, how effective they are with pressure. If you look at the advanced statistics, you could see that Simpson's effectiveness, and all quarterbacks don't like pressure. Their performance diminishes when faced with pressure, but it's a precipitous fall off, right? With Ty Simpson compared to the Dante Moores and Fernando Mendoza. In the case of Moore, the conversation, I distinctly remember having a conversation with Headley about this, as far as whether or not we think he could benefit from going back to school, right? Headley mentioned he kind of reminds me of Jane Daniels in terms of the delivery, in terms of the body type a little bit. Not necessarily the same athlete in the open field, but certainly there's some parallels there. I just think because of this quarterback class, how it's far more lean than we had anticipated. I think Dante Moore is going to strike while the iron's hot. He should. To me, he should be the second quarterback off the board, and I feel much more comfortable taking him in the top half of the first round as compared to a Ty Simpson, right? Again, Mendoza, I think, certainly has done all the things necessary to be the first quarterback off the board, just in terms of his play at Indiana. I've mentioned it before. I was late to the party on him. Based on what I saw, of course, I watched him play Miami last year. He had a decent game. I saw them Cal lose to FSU, a bad FSU team last year. I wasn't impressed, but I think it may have been, as Drew pointed out, maybe the games that I watched. So watching him this season, and I mentioned it about 3 months ago that I had a video I was working on for Mendoza. It's still sitting in the drafts. We'll get it out on the main channel here in the next few days, early parts of 2026, as draft season picks up steam. the concern was the bevy, the proliferation of RPO, and could that translate? But it's what he does within that, and then you got to kind of see beyond that. As I study him more and more, you could see the NFL throws, the way he really is efficient in the red zone, scoring touchdowns as opposed to settling for field goals, and then some really big time NFL throws, hole shots, opposite hash, where he's driving the football down the field with plenty of pace and velocity, could make all the throws, and there's a certain toughness. There's a certain toughness. I thought, the way he finished that game, the way it started against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, the way he finished it, the way he led his team to wins after having some adversity against Oregon, right, and Dante Moore, as well as Penn State, who feels a pretty good defense. I thought those performances, the way his temperament, his nervous system remained intact, and he was able to kind of raise his play during the most challenging and high leverage situations, is what kind of separates him from the field, right? But as far as talent is concerned, I think Mendoza, that is, and Dante Moore are very close, with Simpson being, a distant third in my mind. So interested to hear what other people's thoughts are. What's going on, Mr. C? How you doing? Those Hawks doing their thing out there. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the NFC West, highly competitive NFC West. We could be seeing the Super Bowl champ come out of the NFC West this year. So would not surprise me. I'll tell you this, Mr. C. I do not want to see Kyle Shanahan choke away another one. But San Francisco, despite all of its injuries, all of their injuries, is right there in the thick of things, man. So you can't count them out. Can't count them out in a single elimination format. So let's talk a little bit about these matchups, these quarterfinals matchups here in the college football playoff 2025. And we'll start with Oregon and Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech is a team that managed to get a bye. They were one of the top four seeds, the fourth seed in this instance. This is quite the matchup, and getting you started early on New Year's Day at 12 p.m. Getting you started early. I think, Texas Tech actually, I believe, will match up very well, particularly because of the way their defensive line plays, led by David Bailey, a player that, Couch Potato General Manager had been very high on from the onset, from summer scouting, right? I think the rest of the prognosticators have caught up with respect to David Bailey, but certainly Couch Potato General Manager was very high on him. I think Drew stamped him at the beginning of the season. He wasn't used particularly well at Stanford, just taking him off the field despite having a lot of talent issues. He makes a wise decision here to transfer to Texas Tech, and Texas Tech, obviously, a really good football team. I think they're going to give Oregon everything they can handle. They can give Oregon everything they can handle. It's to me, it's what type of Oregon team is going to show up, right? Are they going to be the physical team that can control the line of scrimmage, or are they going to be kind of passive and finesse? I think you got to match Texas Tech's physicality. I really do. Texas Tech plays terrific defense. They can score points, but they are led by a really impressive defense. They turn the ball over. They can affect the passer. Clearly, you want to be able to run the football, but I do think this is ultimately going to come down to the offensive line, their ability to keep Dante Moore upright, give him time to get the ball to the playmakers. I think certainly Texas Tech's front seven, there's a lot to like about that. I won't call their secondary a weakness, but certainly that's not where the NFL prospects to this point within the evaluation. That could change over the course of the next few months. But certainly to this point, that's not the area where you look and you say, okay, there's just all this NFL talent is oozing. That could just be my naivety, my ignorance in terms of Texas Tech's defensive backfield. But certainly when you think about the Red Raiders, it starts with David Bailey and Romello Height, who could end up both being going in the first round. David Bailey for sure. Top 10 pick in my mind, top 10 pick in the minds of Couch Potato General Manager. So I think outside of, for obvious reasons, Miami, Ohio State, which is going to be played on the 31st, New Year's Eve, this is the game I'm most interested in. I'm most interested in this matchup because I think there's some different styles of play here. I think there's some interesting, not necessarily storylines, but the inherent matchups, particularly with Texas Tech's defensive line and Oregon's offensive line, is something that I'm really interested to see. Bama, Indiana. I expect. I know Indiana's the only undefeated team out there. Bama's had kind of some ups and downs, kind of play down to the competition. Um, Ty Simpson better buckle his chin strap. I mentioned it before. I think Ty Simpson struggles too much. Again, I don't expect perfection by any stretch of the imagination. When you're dealing with pressure, quarterbacks get moved off their spot. Like your accuracy, your decision making, all of it will be impacted. That's to be expected. But to the degree, right? The way folks talk about Ty Simpson and having him in that conversation, perhaps being the first quarterback, like I just don't see it. I don't see it when the in those pressure moments and in those moments where he's not necessarily having his best game, he's had some adversity, his ability to kind of right the ship. I haven't seen it to the degree that I'd like to see it. And I think Indiana's going to give Alabama everything they can handle. Again, we're talking about two teams that, historically Alabama boasts its size and its physicality and overall talent, right? Indiana is as physical as any team in the nation. Literally. Literally. They will punch you in the mouth, whether it be the offensive line, whether it be the defense. I think they're very well coached. Kurt Signetti has done a great job. They disguise their coverage as well. Like there's very little that you look at this Indiana team and say, that they don't do a certain thing well or a certain phase of the game. And when you think about Indiana, generally you don't think great athletes, as far as the skill positions are concerned. No, they have them. They have them. Surratt, Cooper. Hopefully Cooper is healthy. He had an extra week to get healthy. Got hurt in Ohio State game. Their running backs, like they got playmakers. They got guys who can affect the passer. They got guys who can hold up D'Angelo Pounds, undersized defensive back, but he plays big. Had him manned up with Jeremiah Smith in that Big Ten championship. Did a great job. I think Indiana wins this game. I don't know. To me, it's a coin flip with respect to Oregon, Texas Tech. I think Indiana wins this game. I think they win it relatively comfortably. Relatively. I don't think it's a runaway, but it's obviously going to be a really intriguing matchup because you have a couple of the top quarterback prospects, right? And on the off chance that Ty Simpson, Alabama, outplay Fernando Mendoza in Indiana, that could certainly help buoy his stock even further. He has quite a few fans quite a few fans. But certainly being able to win this head-to-head matchup, if he plays well in this head-to-head matchup, comes out on the winning side, that can certainly buoy his draft stock as well. Ole Miss, Georgia. Kirby Smart coming in to continue to get it done. It's remarkable, right? Even when you think Georgia may have slipped, they don't have receivers, offensive line was struggling. They had a little bit of a blip last year, and now, mind you, they made the college football playoff last year. Had a little bit of a blip last year, and here they are, right back in the thick of things. They've gone nowhere, right? They've absolutely gone nowhere. They've just continued to be the model of consistency under Kirby Smart. They face an Ole Miss team that is explosive. I don't know that Ole Miss has the same NFL laden defense that it did a year ago, but certainly they are an explosive team. Now the question becomes, the coaching situation, right? With Lane Kiffin moving on to LSU, certainly didn't impact them in the first round of the college football playoff. But now you're facing Kirby Smith and company. They've had some extra time to get healthy. They've been preparing for you for the last however many days. It's going to be a tall order, I think, for Ole Miss. I think they're Georgia's favorite nearly here by 7, a full touchdown. It's going to be a tall order for Ole Miss to win this game. They can force some turnovers, get Gunnar Stockton, whom is another player I think deals with adversity well, right? I've seen on a number of occasions, and of course he's not draft eligible, I don't believe, but he's certainly helping himself. I think if he can put another season, 2026 season together, another good one, he'll be in the conversation among the top quarterbacks available because of just the way he plays after having dealt with adversity. There are peaks and valleys, right? There's momentum shifts, right? Things go awry. Things outside of your control go awry, right? The NFL is typically a one possession league, right? Most games are decided by one score, right? And you need the quarterbacks that kind of have that intestinal fortitude and can deal with having had a turnover or a receiver has a bad drop. running back blows a blitz pickup assignment, whatever the case may be, and just have that short memory and be able to bounce back and make the play the next time around. I think Gunnar Stockton has demonstrated the ability to do that. So he, among others, Georgia has no shortage of NFL talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, offensive line, that you want to pay attention to. I love CJ Allen. That's my guy. Stamped him during summer scouting. I know his star has diminished with the rise of an Arvell Reese, who we'll talk about here in just a second. Some other players at that position, but certainly CJ Allen continues to be the leader of that defense and incredibly consistent. So I got Georgia. Holding serve here against SEC foe Ole Miss. And in the first game of this quarterfinals round, as I mentioned, December 31st, New Year's Eve, will be my Miami Hurricanes against Ohio State. And this one is the biggest line, as you can see. Ohio State is favored by nearly 10 points, 2 scores. Um, Understandably so, right? You could see the Miami Texas A&M game. The offense just wasn't really there for large portions of that game. Of course, there were some inclement weather as far as wind gusts are concerned. It affected the kicking game to a certain degree, the passing game certainly. To me, this comes down to two things, right? And again, a lot of NFL talent, certainly with Ohio State on their defense in particular. Carnell Tate, arguably the top receiver in this class, this upcoming class. Of course, Jeremiah Smith, who's not draft eligible, will be perhaps the top player in the 2027 NFL draft class. It comes down to two things for me for Miami to pull the upset here, and it's a matter of protecting the football, not turning the ball over. Ohio State's defense has been incredibly stingy this year, right? On the few occasions that they've bent, they don't break. They get goal line stands, short yardage stands. There's a kind of this palpable desire to be aggressive in these short yardage situations. And to me, I think, especially considering how that Indiana, the Big Ten matchup went, I think points are going to be at a premium. I think points are going to be at a premium here. I don't know that, I know there are Buckeye fans who feel like, well, our offense is so much better than Texas A&M's. I really like the game plan that Indiana had, and I think it could be replicated, right? You got a young quarterback, obviously talented in Julian Sand, but you got a young quarterback who hasn't seen it all. He hasn't seen it all. He hasn't figured it all out. So you can do some things in terms of disguises, right? And call me a homer. I think Miami, considering the vast improvement they've made on the defensive side of the ball, I think they are a better defense, player for player. They are a better defense than Indiana. Now, I think Indiana is playing as well as any other team, on the defensive side of the ball. Again, because of that physicality and how sound they are in terms of their assignments and being able to disguise things and create opportunities for their players to make plays, and those players making those plays on a consistent basis. But player for player, I think Miami is slightly more talented defense, right? Perhaps a significantly more talented defense when you start talking about Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. To me, where I think Indiana does a better job is that they have fewer breakdowns, fewer lapses, right? And again, market improvement from 2024. It is night and day as it relates to Miami's defense. But certainly, I've seen teams get vertical on Miami. I've seen teams create a little consternation with some shifts, movement, whatever the case may be, and then you have a blown coverage, whatever. You can't afford that. Jeremiah Smith's going to house that. You cannot afford that. Make Ohio State earn it. I don't know that they have. I know Bo Jackson has played well. He set some freshman records in terms of running the ball, but we're not talking about Judkins and Trevion Henderson, right? This Ohio State team is not as good as it was last year. They clearly understand, the type of play that's necessary in order to make a deep run, right? And that carried over from last year into this year. They weren't tested. I think everybody thought, the game, the opener against Texas would be more competitive. Arch Manning clearly wasn't ready. Ohio State was not tested throughout this season until they faced Indiana. The one team that I thought that legitimately, could line up and execute, whether it be the defensive side of the ball, special teams, whatever the case may be, at a high enough level, beat them. The one real test beat them. And like I said, player for player, I think Miami is a better team than Indiana, more talented. Let me put it that way. Let me put it that way. I won't necessarily say better team, but more talented for the individual player. The other side of that coin is the quarterback, and this is where Indiana has a clear advantage in my mind. Right, Fernando Mendoza, a Miami native. I think he went to the same high school as Mario Cristobal. Interesting enough, Mario Cristobal and Fernando Mendoza's dad were high school football teammates. Like he should have been a Cane. He should have been a Cane. But to his credit, he found the right home. He and Kurt Signetti obviously are pushing all the right buttons. Mendoza doesn't falter. I thought last week Beck seemed overwhelmed. The weather notwithstanding, I thought Beck just did not rise to the moment. I thought Shannon Dawson, Miami's offensive coordinator, did not do a good job in terms of understanding what was working, what wasn't working. Miami had the running game going from the jump. It shouldn't have been scoreless or 3-3 or whatever it was at the half. It shouldn't have been. Miami was consistent in terms of running the football. They were getting chunks. The offensive line was moving people. They were the more physical team, frankly. I think Miami obviously, it has a better offensive showing. In this game, we're going to need Carson Beck to make some plays. It's just the reality of the situation. There's going to come a time where we need Carson Beck to hang in there, take a big hit, right? Where Kalen McDonald, Arvell Reese, downs off the blitz, whatever the case may be. He's going to have to stand in there and deliver the football, make a big play, a big third down conversion, whatever the case may be. Can he do that? Can he rise to the occasion? Can he deal with that high leverage situation? It's one of those things that separates. I don't think in terms of just arm talent, and maybe more so now considering that Beck had the Tommy John surgery. Perhaps from a physical tools perspective, there's more of a gap there. But prior to, I think people really liked, and there were reasons to really like Carson Beck's arm talent, right? It had always been the decision making. It had always been consistency from one possession to the next, from one quarter to the next, 1 week to the next with him, right? And again, last week he did not play particularly well. He's got to play better. I'm not saying that we have to put the game on his shoulders necessarily, right? I think you want to play field position. I think you want to play defense. I don't think, again, points are going to be at a premium. Take the points, right? But excuse me. I think most importantly, Miami cannot afford to turn the ball over, right? Ohio State is too good defensively to begin with, right? You cannot give away possessions against this team. Notice I'm not talking a ton about Ohio State's offense because again, I think Indiana did a masterful job of changing up the look pre-snap, post-snap, and confusing a young quarterback. Right? I don't think Ohio State's offensive line is as good as it was last year. I don't think their backfield is as good as it was last year. Right? They got the perimeter weapons, but if you can create any doubts, right, in the mind of that young quarterback and allow for Mesidor, Bain to get lathered up and affect him. Maybe not necessarily a sack, but speed him up a bit, right? Make sure a throw is off target. A tip ball here, Bryce Fitzgerald on the back end. These are the things that I'm talking about. You want to steal a possession. These are the things I'm talking about. So this is going to be a good one. Obviously, you know about the last time, not the last time they played, but of course the Fiesta Bowl, where they had the controversial call at the end of the game. I'm still bitter about that. Miami fans clearly are bitter about that. I want this one. I want this one for personal reasons. I want this one. I think Miami can pull the upset, but it's going to come down to avoiding giving Ohio State giving up that explosive, right? Making Ohio State earn it on the offensive side of the ball. And then Carson Beck has to be substantially better than he was a week ago, right? Again, I don't know that he has to necessarily be the savior per se, but he's got to be significantly better in terms of keeping Miami on schedule. And that extends to Shannon Dawson in terms of his play calling, right? Having a pulse, understanding, what's working, what's not, getting the right players the ball. I imagine Ohio State will try to take away Malachi Tony. Other guys got to step up. Other players in the passing game have to step up, So we'll see. We'll see how this one turns out. Really excited about this one. Again, you look at any of these four games, and there's no shortage of NFL prospects, NFL draft prospects. So you want to tune in for obviously for the competition, the pageantry, the bowl games, the college football playoff implications, but a lot of NFL draft talent in these games between the lines as well. So that's my preview of the quarterfinals of the college football playoff. So, with that being said, let's turn our attention to the NFL. Let's turn our attention to the NFL. And I want to take a look at the standings. Let's take a look at the standings. And I'm going to go division by division and talk a little bit about some, not all 32, but some of the teams and my thoughts on performance, where it went wrong, what's going right in some instances, who I think can make a legitimate run here at the Super Bowl. It seems to be wide open. It seems to be wide open on both sides of the or both conferences, excuse me. And then of course, again, as the second half draft show would suggest, NFL draft implications. Like what do these teams need? These teams that may have just missed it, may have just been recently eliminated. The teams that obviously, the 3-12 teams, what they need. Generally speaking, is a quarterback. The Titans, a little bit different situation. I'm going to kind of touch on a little bit of that. So let me pull that up and let's talk about it. All right. So right at the top, you got the New England Patriots, who, I know Drew was a big fan of Drake May. That was Drew's guy. Drake May was absolutely his guy. And you could see the talent. You could certainly see the talent at UNC. I think, supporting cast, offensive line in particular, may have kind of impacted people's evaluations, but New England certainly got it right. They got it right with Drake May. They got it right with Mike Vrabel. Right. It just goes to show having the right coach, being able to tap in, make some decent, some quality moves in the offseason. They're sitting at 12-3. They're in the catbird seat. They're going to have an opportunity. They're going to have an opportunity here to be the number one seed. Denver just won here recently. It takes them to 13-3. But certainly the Patriots are going to have an opportunity to potentially be the number one seed. And it's remarkable to see how quickly they've turned that thing around, right? This is May's second season, Again, the addition of Vrabel, I don't know what the Titans were thinking. The addition of Vrabel seemingly has worked wonders. They've pushed all the right buttons. Josh McDaniels, in the role that he seems to be best suited for, not an NFL head coach by any stretch of the imagination, but in Boston, in New England, Foxborough, calling the plays, working with the young quarterback. They seem to have it going. They're playing great defense, physical defense. Um, really impressed with the way New England has turned things around quickly with Drake May at the helm. Buffalo, you would think this would be the year. You would think this would be the year. You'd think, maybe last year was the year, right? Um, Buffalo has a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde type of, I don't know that they're necessarily built for playoff football, right? Now, I take that with a grain of salt because they are running the football very well. They're running the football very well. James Cook, I had a conversation. I had to ask Hedley and Drew, I'm like, is Baby Cook better than Dalvin Cook? And when you think about it through the prism of NFL careers and consistency, I think I'm going to lean James Cook. Now, maybe Dalvin's peak may have been higher, but just consistency and the way he's showing up and some of those vertical cuts that he does and physicality. That's the part that kind of surprised me. Did not get to see him tote the pill a ton at Georgia. Was used more as a passing down back, but he's developed into a terrific ball carrier. And I think the fact that they can run the football and they have been running the football and just out of necessity, they've been kind of, the passing game has been inside out. You would think, are they going to be able to stop the run is my question, right? Are they gonna just poop the bed? Because it's just every once in a while, Buffalo has a head scratching loss. They have a head scratching loss, man. It doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know that, and it doesn't, team playing the best football at the right time. Of course, you can see here they won 4 straight. Maybe this is the year. Maybe this is the year they figure it out. But I'm always a little leery of Buffalo. They have a long history of just, for lack of a better term, choking. Frankly, choking. Right. So we'll see if they can exercise some of those demons. The Dolphins is such a quagmire of a franchise right now. Of course, they're not going to be in the playoffs. It does look like they're going to retain their coach. Um, the quarterback position continues to be a question mark. I don't know that this is the draft for it. I think you're going to be. They started yours this past week. I think Tua will be at the helm once again. In my mind, they have to be better on both sides of the line of scrimmage. I know there's a huge need in the defensive backfield, but to me, I think you want to continue to build this thing from the inside out. So we'll see. We'll see where they are slotted in the draft and what they prioritize in the draft, right? Because when you think about defensive backs, frankly, I think the first defensive back off the board is Caleb Downs, right? And unless you're going to build this Dolphins defense around him, probably going to address the trenches. The Dolphins could use it without question. The Jets, they need a quarterback. Plain and simple. They need a trigger man. Pittsburgh, Mike Tomlin does it again with 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. Baltimore has been a monumental disappointment. Of course, Lamar Jackson missed some time due to injury, but hasn't played particularly well. The Bengals and Browns, they have their issues. The Browns, 3-12. I said it throughout the season, and you've seen it play out. If you've paid any attention about that whole situation, that whole saga at the quarterback position, you can tell Kevin Stefanski not necessarily a fan. Andrew Berry wasn't a fan. But Shador gives you the best chance to win. And with those multiple first-round picks, I don't know that I feel so strongly about Mendoza and Dante Moore that I would leverage future draft capital when I have other areas that I need to address, namely that offensive line. I think that's the biggest glaring issue. I would give it another year with Shador, man. I'd give Shador, outfit him with some better weapons on the perimeter. I love Harold Fannin. He's been terrific. Jerry Jeudy continues to be, helter skelter. So I'd like to get him another weapon, but certainly they need to prioritize the offensive line, protecting whomever's playing quarterback. And in my mind, my opinion, it should be Shador. The Bengals probably could use some of that as well. They have issues everywhere other than at the quarterback and receiver position. Take your pick, best player available, right? In my mind, you need to build it from the inside out. So there won't be any Trey Hendrickson next year, although they've invested fairly heavily along the defensive line over the last couple of drafts. There's still more work to be done there as well. So that's kind of the AFC. I'm going to go back to Baltimore real quick. Pittsburgh, do you want to figure out, try to identify the quarterback of the future who's gonna take over after Aaron Rodgers? TJ Watt, having dealt with injuries a little bit longer too. Obviously, he's still effective when he's on the field, but you got to be thinking about Cam Hayward, and it's an older roster. DK Metcalf now dealing with a potential suspension, and who's going to be. I don't trust DK Metcalf. Like there are areas of this Pittsburgh roster that need to be addressed as well. So they'll be in all likelihood picking later in the draft and in the bottom half of the first round. But there's a number of different directions they could go. The Ravens, in my mind, I've said it before. Yes, he is, Mr. C. You're the Seattle Seahawks fan. You already know. I've never been a big DK Metcalf fan. Phenomenal athlete, but I don't. He's a head case. He's a head case, right? And to me, he hasn't done enough to get the kind of rope that you would give some of these receivers, right? Some of these mercurial, temperamental receivers, you give a little extra rope to because of just how effective they are week in and week out. Metcalf he's boomer bust, man. It's boomer bust, Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly. Mr. C, has sometimes like just Just not a natural receiver. He's not. He's a phenomenal athlete, just not a natural receiver. And it's like you got George Pickens all over again, man. It's tough. Anyway, Baltimore. One, they're still looking for that quintessential number one wideout. Still looking for that. I think their offensive line could still use some work. And this team has to figure out their pass rush, man. But Baltimore is this, you can't wait. I imagine Mike Green will take another step forward, right? You traded away Adolfo Owe, whom I was never a fan of, but made some plays, had gotten better, certainly had gotten better. I don't necessarily disagree with them moving him, not giving him the best big contract, but they're gonna have to figure out and find that guy who can consistently get to the quarterback. Perhaps Mike Green develops into that. I really like Mike Green coming out of Marshall in terms of the talent. But that's the area on the defense that they got to get squared away. Got to get that squared away. I think Baltimore, just when you look at the individual players, as far as like, Hamilton and Roquan Smith and, my God, Malachi Starks and, Wiggins, they got the names, but it's just not coalescing on Sundays. And a big part of that is, I think, Mr. C, your head coach, the fact that they lost a defensive coordinator. It's the same thing, we're going to talk about the NFC in a bit here. Same thing that's happening in Detroit right now. You lose good coaches, man. It's tough. It's tough to bounce back when you lose good coaches. So really disappointing season from Baltimore, for sure. Excuse me. Give me just a second. All right. Sorry about that, folks. I just need to take a brief reprieve there, clear my throat a little bit. Look at the AFC South, man. Listen, Indianapolis came out like gangbusters. I think it was the Steelers. I think the Steelers managed to kind of, slow them down. Daniel Jones gets hurt, and they had caught fire in the bottle, lightning in the bottle, I should say. Daniel Jones gets hurt. They lost the last five. Season's over, right? They pushed the chips to the middle of the table. Gave up, some big time draft capital to acquire Sauce Gardner, and it did not work out, man. It did not work out, and I think the Colts are a really good example of, when you draft the quarterback early, man, you got to be able to develop them. You got to have the pieces from a personnel perspective as well as the coaching staff to develop that young talent. I thought Anthony Richardson was a reach. I thought Anthony Richardson had not played enough football, right, at the University of Florida to be considered a top four pick, right? Big time talent, physical traits that you just simply can't teach, but he doesn't know how to play quarterback and he doesn't know how to protect himself. You know what I mean? So, it started off, they were very fast out the gate, but it's petered off, and it's a tough blow. I don't know where the Colts go from here, honestly. Right? They are kind of back in a situation where they may need a quarterback. Now, again, this draft class isn't necessarily, what we had a season ago, right? May not be what we had a season ago. So do you re-up with Daniel Jones? Right? Is that injury something you feel like you could just do a kind of a short term, maybe a 1 year or 2 year deal with the team option, year two or something to kind of bridge it? I'm not sure, but tough look for the Colts. Tennessee Titans, it's got to be about Cam Ward. And I think it starts with even before we get to players, it starts with the right coaches, right? Again, I don't know what the Titans were thinking moving off of Vrabel. Um, it certainly hasn't worked out. They fired their coach in season. You've seen a bit more life. You've seen the Titans be more competitive. They got some young players that have made some plays over the season. They've actually started to run the football better over the last month or so, and I think that's a big reason why they've managed to win a couple of games here recently. Is they've been able to take some pressure off of Cam Ward, but the supporting cast isn't where it needs to be. It just simply isn't where it needs to be in order to compete in a division with some young good football teams here. Jacksonville is for real. Jacksonville, it makes me think back. I have a good friend of mine that lives in Jacksonville, from Jacksonville, Duval County, boy Rod. went to school with. He's a diehard Jacksonville Jaguar fan. He was so excited when I think it was a Monday night game where the Jags beat Kansas City. Now, obviously, Kansas City not the team it's been over the last half decade, right? This year they're out of it. Mahomes hurt. Um, even with the healthy Mahomes, this team wasn't going to shake anything this year. But he was so excited about that win, and that win meant a lot. And I look back on it. And I think to myself, I think that's when the flip, or rather the switch was flipped for this team. I think this is when they started to truly believe. I'm thinking, it's just another game, man. It's what is it? It's September. It's October, right? It's just another game. It's a long season. Don't get ahead of yourself. But I think that confidence, the confidence that they kind of garnered after that win, and Trevor Lawrence playing better. The timely trade to acquire Jacoby Myers and lose Travis Hunter as he was just coming into his own. They trade for Jacoby Myers. They pushed all the right buttons. They did a good job of kind of reinventing a secondary that was much maligned a season ago. Jacksonville's playing really good football. I thought the win that they had against the Broncos a week ago on the road at Mile High, very impressive win. Very impressive win. I know I'm gonna catch grief for it. I'm still not sold on Bo Nix, man. He certainly played much better than I had anticipated. But the Broncos are doing what Kansas City did a season ago. So I just wonder if it's something that can be sustained, right? Broncos are coming out, to their credit, they're coming out on the positive side of a lot of these one-score games, last possession games. And to be honest, that is the nature. That is the nature of the NFL. But for you to win those as frequently as they are, at the clip they are, I don't know that that's sustainable. So we'll see. We'll see if they can, if the Broncos can really make a deep run. I question that. I question that when you talk about Josh Allen, right? A Jaguars team that obviously is playing with a lot of confidence. And again, they just beat a very good Broncos team on the road. The Texans, they could play defense with anyone, right? They got CJ Stroud back. I don't know that they have the horses on the offensive side of the ball, but we're talking about one possession games. We're talking about one possession games. Texans defense, their ability to affect the passer is nothing to sneeze at. And then of course New England. New England's playing as well as anyone in the AFC or in the league for that matter. And don't count out Pittsburgh, just given that they have that veteran savvy. I think the Broncos will probably handle Pittsburgh, but there are a lot of good football teams, that I think could certainly knock off the Broncos, who currently are sitting in the one seed. And one of those teams happens to play in their division with the Chargers. This Chargers team, or franchise that matter, has always been one of those teams that has kind of just petered out, right? It has struggled to deal with injuries. They're different under Jim Harbaugh. They're different, right? They've dealt with their fair share of injuries as typical. That's what you expect with the Chargers, right? Drew says change the color of the bolt, maybe that'll help. But certainly they have a different level of physicality. One, and they're not letting the adversity take over, right? Snowball into they drop three. Of course, they've won four straight. They were or rather 7-4. They're now 11-4. They're in striking distance here in the division. I don't think they're going to win it, but again, I think the Chargers, the way they play along the line of scrimmage, and certainly not having Joe Alt hurts in that regard, but I think they can knock off any of these teams, right? In a single elimination, the Chargers are good enough. Justin Herbert's playing well enough to knock off any of these teams. So going to be really exciting to see how it all plays out here in the AFC. Let me catch up a little bit here with Mr. C's comments. Reading Lamar might be available. I'm hearing the same thing as well. I don't think that's the move, though. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I heard a rumor. I don't know how true it is. I don't want to give it too much, airtime, because again, I haven't substantiated it. But they're talking about Lamar and his preparation and so on and so forth. This is a two-time MVP, if I'm not mistaken. It's a two-time MVP. In a league where you got some aging quarterbacks, you got some young guys who are unproven. You got a draft class that was kind of turned on its ear, so you're not necessarily anticipating the bevy of prospects at that position. I don't think you want to move off of Lamar, man. Like, who are you going to replace Lamar with? Who? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no one in this draft class. I'm okay. Let me move Lamar and get some draft capital, and then I'm just going to take one of these quarterbacks, and we'll be set. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case. I think when you got a talent like Lamar, a guy who's proven to be able to do it, I think maybe shaking up some things within that coaching staff may be necessary. I think certainly there are incumbents in that starting lineup that need to be challenged. And of course you can challenge Lamar. You can hold him accountable, but moving Lamar to me makes no sense. But Mr. C, I'm acknowledging I've kind of heard some of those same rumors as well. Yeah, yeah, Shaheed is a good player, man. He's a good player. I think I assume he is a unrestricted free agent, and that's the reason why New Orleans moved off of him. He had some draft capital. But yeah, I like Shaheed a lot. You got the Seahawks and the Pats. That'd be a repeat of about 10 years ago. Um, who do I have in the Super Bowl? I'll get to that. I'll get to that here shortly. I'll trade the Sam Darnold picks. I would too. I would too. You've seen Sam Darnold kind of come back down to earth a little bit, right? But Kenneth Walker is toting that pill, man. He's toting that pill. If they can continue to run the football, and Darnold make enough plays, hit JSN, hit the tight ends, they can run the football, and the Seahawks are playing as good a brand of defense as anyone in the league. Seahawks are gonna be tough out. They're gonna be a tough out, especially if you have to play up there with the 12s, right? All right. Last couple teams here in the AFC West, and then we'll turn our attention to the NFC. KC, as I mentioned, disappointing season for Kansas City, obviously, right? I think I was just talking about it with Denver and the fact that they just kind of keep coming out on top in some of these very close one-score games. Well, Kansas City, I think, was 13-0, 12-0 in one-score games last year. It just, the pendulum swung the other way. The ball, the oblong pigskin, it's shaped funny, man, and it's not bouncing in KC's favor, right? It had been. Casey had learned how to kind of handle themselves in those situations, and I think more so than Kansas City, beating their opponent, they weren't losing. I think teams psychologically were beat typically facing Kansas City. Kansas City had this long run of dominance, right? They their quarterback effectively keeps them in every game, keeps them competitive in every game, and the opponents, in my mind, psychologically would beat themselves. They would beat themselves like, oh, here we go again. You know what I'm saying? So, with that said, I thought Kansas City did a really great job in terms of the draft class. Now, not every player has contributed or had that opportunity, been healthy. But I think if they can stack another good draft class, figure out the offensive line, letting Joe Tooney go didn't make any sense whatsoever. Um, and they have to replace one Kelsey. Kelsey's at the end of his career. They got to figure out how to effectively use Xavier Worthy. Um, I think they'll be able to find backs. I think they'll be able to find backs. Chris Jones. Chris Jones still can make plays here and there, but he's not the force that he was previously. So, do you have enough along that down line to really be able to run Spags defense? I think the secondary will bounce back. I think McDuffie probably will bounce back. He's had a rough season, but I think he'll bounce back. I like Noah Williams. I like Hicks. I think they have most of the pieces, but I would say they have to figure out how to effectively use Xavier Worthy. They need to solidify the offensive line, and they need to improve their pass rush. I think they definitely need to improve their pass rush. You can't just rely on Spags blitzing. They need their down four to get home with more consistency. So Kansas City has a little work to do, but I don't think it's so bad that they can't right the ship this offseason, right? They've demonstrated the ability to backfill as they lose players to free agency and so on and so forth. But um, I don't play with the offensive line, right? I don't just let proven commodities walk out the door along the offensive line. So I think that was probably one of the major misses here. And they've been terrible, as you can see, away 1-6 on the road. They've been terrible away from Arrowhead. And then the Raiders, quarterback, offensive line starts right there. You know, Gino's not the answer, man. Gino's not the answer. But again, are you going to be in position to be able to get a guy? Perhaps they're 2-13, and in fact, they have the worst record in the NFL right now, if I'm not mistaken. They and the Giants seemingly have their quarterback at least for the time being. Raiders need to go ahead and grab their quarterback as well. All right, let's turn our attention to the NFC, right? And we got the NFC East, the least, right? Jane Daniels of the Commanders, his injuries. Commanders obviously have had a rough season. The Giants clearly fired their coach. I'm hearing Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame's head coach, might be their preferred candidate. That'd be interesting to see. Dallas, healthy skeleton. This defensively, just been bad. Among the worst in the league. They can score points with the best. You can see them. They're like a top 3 offense in the league, perhaps the top scoring offense in the league. So, but they can't stop a nosebleed, right? I think they've given up the most points in the NFL this year with 477. I think the next closest is Cincinnati, the 458. But you can see, they're just a shade under 500 because of how well that offense has played, how well Dak has played. So, Dallas has some work to do, clearly. They made some moves, acquired some draft capital, traded away some draft capital. So can they once again, another draft class? My guy Siobhan Ravel, man, I don't know that he's completely healthy, but he's been toast. He's been toast out there. They've been picking on him, man. So they're gonna need those young players to step up. I don't know if Trayvon Diggs is gonna be long for Dallas either, right? They have some significant concerns at the cornerback position. So we'll see. We'll see what Dallas does this offseason. There's definitely some work to do, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Philadelphia has been, helter skelter, frankly, right? I think one of the main things you can point to, obviously, is the amount of production, particularly in terms of getting after the passer that they lost this past offseason. That young secondary, I think, will continue to grow, get better, led by Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Health is the main thing, I think, in terms of that secondary. But it's the pass rush. It's the waves of pass rushers being healthy, having lost some mainstays along the way. You had Hassan Reddick, you had Josh Sweat, you had Brandon Graham. I think Graham came out of retirement to help him out to make a run. you know what I'm saying? And then when you talk about the offensive line, Lane Johnson has been dealing with injury off and on. I don't know that Jared Mailata has had a great season. Saquon Barkley struggled. I don't think Saquon Barkley's struggles have anything to do with the offensive line. I think it has a lot to do with some off the field stuff as well as play design. I think the play design has been a bit questionable. That's what happens when you lose your coordinator. So you win a Super Bowl. Your offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, he ends up being the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, right? And being able to mitigate, roster attrition on top of coach attrition is a tough thing to do. That's why it's so difficult to go back to back. But they will be the lone representative in the playoffs from the NFC. The NFC North is so interesting, man. It really is. Like I'm looking at this record here of the Minnesota Vikings, and it's shocking. It's shocking that they're 8-8, right? JJ McCarthy has had a couple of decent games, but the Vikings have managed to win the last 4, right? And it's been led by that defense. Brian Flores, they've righted the ship. They're making it really difficult on their opponents. They've managed to run the ball. Justin Jefferson definitely having his least impactful season. But here they are sitting at 500 on a team that, hasn't looked particularly good this year, aside from that defense, right? And, of course, yesterday they played the Detroit Lions, and the Lions are playing for their playoff hopes, right? The Lions are in their championship window, right? I think the Lions have done a remarkable job. Dan Campbell, that front office, getting the talent, bringing it in, developing those guys. Of course, They made a deep run last year. They lost both of their coordinators. Ben Johnson now with the division leading Chicago Bears, right? You're seeing the fruits of his labor working with Caleb Williams and all of Caleb Williams' talent now. And then of course Aaron Glenn, and it's been tough on Aaron Glenn, but I like Aaron Glenn for that role with New York, right? Having played there, I think he understands the market. He just needs his quarterback. I think that's the first step. And he probably needs to get another offensive coordinator. Um, that said, Detroit is really disappointing, right? Really disappointing. We're talking about. I mentioned, the Dallas's offense, perhaps the only more explosive offense in the league from a points perspective. To the Rams and Detroit, right? Was for the last month or so, couple of months, they up and down the field, no problem, and then they've hit a rough patch here recently. They dropped the last three, most recently to the Vikings, and you could see the injuries and their depth being challenged, right? Whether it be in the secondary, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, who I think is perhaps their most important defender outside of Aiden Hutchinson. The Lions have some issues at the second level of defense. I wasn't a huge Jack Campbell fan, but he's okay. Anzalone, Rodriguez, these guys, their run fits are poor. Getting gashed. Um, the offensive line, which I thought was really the main pillar associated with this Lions team. They've dealt with injury. They've dealt with roster attrition, free agency, right? Their ability to replace those players and play at a high level. It's not an easy thing year to year. So it's really tough pill to swallow because, like I said, the Lions are right in the middle of their championship window, right? And these teams, they typically on the high end, they have like a 3 to 4 year window to win a championship. They're right in the thick of things, playoff team consistently, competing for a division title consistently. Um, the rest of the division has caught up. The rest of the division has caught up, and in this instance has lapped them. Has forced Detroit into the cellar. As good of an offense as they've been, just haven't been able to overcome again those injuries and losses in terms of personnel, both on the field and in that coaching staff. All right, talk about Carolina Panthers in the NFC South, who currently control their own destiny. Right, they're going to play Tampa Bay again, and I think this will obviously be probably the determining game here. For who wins the division. I really like the job that Carolina's coaching staff has done, right, in terms of developing players that, I think many of us, on the outside looking in, I think Panthers fans probably had a different perspective, but on the outside looking in, you think about Ike Ekwonu, and his early struggles, and of course Bryce Young's well documented struggles, and sticking with those guys, working through that, getting those guys coached up, right? Rebuilding their confidence and getting things going out. Now, what's really been surprising, and I like it a lot, is the way Carolina's defense has started to respond. Carolina's defense has really started to respond. Um, as you can see in terms of points allowed, they're the best in the division. And it's a young group. It's a really young group. So you get Derek Brown back, but it's Nick Scorton now starting to get some run. It's Mike Jackson opposite J.C. Horn, a healthy J.C. Horn for a change. Like Carolina's defense, I think, is really starting to play, or rather, the offense is playing complementary football to that defense because you can see Carolina's offense for large parts of the season has struggled. Passing game has struggled. They've gotten better. Bryce has gotten better, certainly, but 287 points, that's among the worst in the league, if not the worst. I think Tennessee, looks like Cleveland, and New York, the Jets have fewer points. Those are and Las Vegas. Those are the only teams that have fewer points. So Saints as well. Sorry. Fifth worst in terms of scoring offense are the Carolina Panthers. Yet here they are at the top of the NFC South, which, like I said, the offense has started to play complementary football to a defense that has really started to play really good football. And I don't think they're getting the credit that they deserve. The investments they've made via free agency as well as the draft really paying off. So, the way I see it is that you can go back, to that offense once again. You can obviously continue to outfit that defense. I think the 2026 NFL draft class is probably going to be more talent, top to bottom, on the defensive side of the ball. But I would not hesitate. I would not hesitate to continue to invest and build around Bryce Young. Bryce has shown me enough. I was already a fan. Others maybe not so much, considering he's more diminutive, didn't necessarily have the overwhelming physical tools, but it's a nervous system, right? And when the confidence is intact, you can see him make plays that don't necessarily show up in the box score, but they're winning football plays, right? So keep it going, keep it going. I like Carolina. I think they actually punch their ticket. I think they punch their ticket. The Bucks have struggled. Baker Mayfield, in particular, has struggled over the last few weeks, month or so. He hasn't played particularly well. The Falcons, man. I just want to see Mike Penix back, man. I want to see Mike Penix healthy. I want to have a conversation with Headley about what this team needs to do in terms of getting over the hump. Thought the Falcons might be able to shake something. They're not so far out of it. They would need some things to obviously go their way in order to be able to force their way into this playoff situation, led by Kirk Cousins at this point. But it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit of a stretch. Bijan Robinson, obviously terrific. Kyle Pitts has come alive. To me, it's the young defense. It's the young defense. It's the young pass rushers, Jalen Walker. It's Xavier Watts. It's those young players. Dorless. Got to talk about Brandon Dorless. He's up to 8 sacks. Whoever's out there was dissing Dorless a season ago. He's healthy. He's healthy and making plays. There's a lot to like about this Falcons team. It has to be about, in my mind, it has to be about Penix. It has to be about that offensive line. It has to be about getting another complement to Drake London, right? And I think at that point, the Falcons could really take off. I think they could really take off. The Saints have played much better football as of late. Have won 3 straight. They've played much better football. Now, do I think that means Tyler Shoe should be the undisputed starter in 2026? No, I would want him competing with someone, but certainly they're playing with a bit more confidence, and they've been able to I think beat some from fairly good teams along the way. The Jets most recently, which obviously isn't a good team, but a couple of good wins in there as well in that 3-game winning streak. That takes us to the NFC West, which is perhaps the most competitive division outside of the NFC North, I think. Um, you got 3 teams with 11 wins or more, right? And of course, Mr. C. Praski's Seahawks at the top of those standings, right? 12-3, playing again, tremendous defense. They got out to a really hot start. Sam Darnold was on fire. Jackson Smith and Jigba, having kind of an MVP type of year, Triple Crown receiving type of year. They've cooled a little bit, but their running game has picked up, which is a good sign. That's a good sign for the offensive line. That's a good sign for Sam Darnold, because the reality is that Sam Darnold is who he is, right? Sam Darnold is streaky. There are times where Sam Darnold looks terrific, looks like that franchise quarterback, looks like that guy who was picked, X amount of years ago as a top 3 pick, right? And then you get the high version of him that's turning the ball over, that isn't playing with confidence, isn't seeing the field well. You know what I mean? So the fact that Seattle can turn to their running game and lean on their defense bodes well. But he's going to have to play better in order to make some noise here in these playoffs. Excuse me. Easy money. There you go. That's what we like to hear. Cha-ching. Yeah. I think Seattle nailed it in terms of their head coach hire season ago. You see it. There's some work to do. I know Mr. Seaprasky is all over it. There's some work to do in terms of augmenting this roster so that you maintain this championship window, right? You don't want it to be a fly in the pan, and it's not a fly in the pan because obviously Seattle was in the thick of things last year. But if you want to maintain that for the next several seasons, you got to make sure that you make some shrewd moves here in the offseason, nail the draft. I know Mr. Presley has talked about that defensive backfield. Adding a pass rush. I know the interior of the offensive line has always been a question mark. I got to ask you though, Mr. C, are you bringing Kenneth Walker back? Are you replacing him? I know haven't always been the biggest Walker fan, man. I think he needs the touches. I think he needs the touches, and they don't necessarily feature him. They don't necessarily feature him. Um, I think if Seattle is going to make some good money or a good deep run, they're going to need Kenneth Walker to have some really big performances along the way. I'm gonna put seven. Understandable, understandable. I'm sure you'll be able to find quality backs. Go ahead and go get you a Jonah Coleman. You know what I mean? He may not have the explosiveness of a Kenneth Walker, but certainly in terms of consistency, um, the Jonah Coleman fits the bill. He checks those boxes. San Francisco, man, like I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know how they're doing it, man. They're doing it with Elmer's glue, some Scotch tape, a lot of injuries. I don't know who's playing quarterback from one week to the next. The offense is predicated on that offensive line and getting as many touches as possible to Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey's been able to stay healthy, and as a result, the offense has been able to do the job. And then defensively, it's just been next guy up. It's just been next guy up, right? Nick Bosa goes down. Warner in the middle of that defense goes down. Your two studs, and you got young players and veterans alike that's coming in and making plays, man. Especially at the second level, you got Taylor Bethune and D. Winters becoming a full-time starter making plays. It's been impressive. It's really been impressive how San Francisco, unlike the Detroit Lions, right? Detroit has had a bevy of injuries, and they just haven't been able to withstand it, right? Whereas San Francisco, they lost their starter for large portions at the beginning of the season. Their top two defenders done for the season, and they've still managed in a very, like I said, a very challenging division to make hay, So they have a shot. They got a shot, unfortunately, Mississippi, to be the first seed in the NFC, and the Clips, the Seattle Seahawks. They actually have the best record among the Seahawks, Niners, and Rams within that division. So you got to keep an eye on that. And that takes me to the Los Angeles Rams, another terrific football team, right? I think the Rams certainly are going to be one of those teams that people feel going to make another run. The way Matthew Stafford had been playing, I know Devontae Adams did get hurt, which hurts, right? But the wizardry we're seeing in terms of the Rams running game is it's staggering, right? Like there was a goal line carry a couple weeks ago, again, one of those Lions losses, and there was so much going on in the backfield. It was just kind of an ISO or lead draw. It wasn't a ton of misdirection in terms of the ball carrier per se, but just the motions and the pulling linemen or whatever the case may be. The defense had no idea what was happening. They had no idea what was happening, and now Kyron Williams obviously has been a good football player over the last few seasons. They got his doppelganger in Blake Corum, getting it going too. So they're able to keep Williams fresh. Puka is healthy. Puka's a problem. They're getting the tight ends involved. Stafford, again, playing at a very high level. Stafford's always had the arm talent. He's always had the ability. And now with his experience and his ability to get them offense into the right play on top of Sean McVay's play design, it's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to deal with defensively. And then, of course, on the defensive side of the ball, the Rams got real good players. They got real good players. I thought the second level of their defense was going to be an Achilles heel. That hasn't necessarily been the case. I think Lamb actually got a contract extension. You got Verse Fist. Brian Young is a problem. So they can get after the passer. And then they got playmakers on the back end. Curl and Kitchens, they'll turn the football over. So, yeah, man, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting over the next couple of weeks to see how the NFC West actually plays out. But, just looking ahead to the playoffs, man, like, you don't want to play any of these teams, particularly the Seahawks and Rams. You do not want to play those teams. And I think in terms of the Rams, if they can if they can improve their run fits, continue to make improvements. So they've gotten better as compared to last year. Remember, obviously, Eagles had multiple 200-yard rushing games. Saquon went crazy. If they can continue to be solid against the run, they're going to be a really tough out as well. Yeah. Yeah, man. That's true. That's true. Byron Murphy, I did not mention him. Um, I did not mention him, Mrs. C. He's really coming to his own. Young player is really coming to his own. Yeah, a lot of talent, a lot of talent on that Seattle defense. Yep. He hurt me though in fantasy last week. Cost me, man. 2 points. You score damn near 40 in an overtime game. You only had 2 points from a kicker. That's rough. Now people are gonna say, well, what the hell are you playing a fantasy league with? It's an old home league. Started about 15 years ago. It got, so you know. It's an old league. It's an old home league. Team defense. You know what I'm saying? It's not even IDP. It's an old home league. But yeah, Myers hurt me. But again, Seattle's buttoned up in every phase as well. All right, and just one more thought here. A team that I don't know. I don't really know where they go from here. The Cardinals sitting at 3-12, it's just dawning on me that their record is as bad as it is. Right? Um, I don't know what the market would be. There's certainly contractual salary cap implications with it, but I don't think this coaching staff wants to move forward with Kyle Murray, right? And I've accepted the fact that Kyler Murray, his preparation, his focus, attention to detail notwithstanding, he has physical limitations, right? My pops calls him little wheels because of how quick he is and how those legs are just spinning, just churning, right? Like he's sudden and he's an athletic quarterback. He can make, he's got the arm to make most of the throws. His height is a problem. It creates an inherent challenge in terms of the design, and being able to read things out on the field. You know what I mean? So that's setting aside perhaps some of the concerns about how seriously he takes his craft. They need a quarterback, but it's a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, unlike the Dolphins, I think the Cardinals will be in position perhaps to acquire a Ty Simpson, a Mendoza, a Dante Moore, right? If they're so inclined. But what does that mean for Kyler Murray? Do you eat it? Is there going to be a trade market for him? I'm that's one of the biggest storylines I think heading into this offseason. Like what would be the right fit? What's the system? What's the ideal system for a Kyler Murray at the NFL level? Right. I think there was a conversation, maybe even on this stream, about him going to Miami. I don't think he can play Mike McDaniel's, his offense, right? Playing under center, play action, bang eights back to the defense. He can't read it out. Yeah, if the Broncos can eat Russell's deal, yeah, perhaps, man. Sometimes you just got to cut it out, cut the limb off. You know what I'm saying? If it's not if it's not working, cut the limb off. Yeah, I think from a scheme perspective, it doesn't necessarily jive. But then again, I think McDaniel is a creative enough play caller who could potentially, you know, design this offense around that skill set. I don't know how much better you're getting, as compared to Tua, right? Tua has, some different challenges, some inherent challenges of his own. How much better are you getting with Kyler Murray as compared to Tua, right? Who's already steeped in your offense. You know what I mean? And that's kind of my thought process there. But when you expand it to the all 31 other teams, like obviously not all 31 teams are in the market for a quarterback. Where's the landing spot? Is it Las Vegas? Maybe, right? Las Vegas wants to run the football. They want to do play action. Maybe get him on the perimeter. I don't know, man. I don't know, man. I'm not sure where Kyler Murray fits in. Now I do think there are a couple of areas where he would be an improvement, and I think Vegas certainly is one of those few places, that fit that bill. So we shall see. But again, one of the biggest to me question mark. I don't think they're going to be interested. I don't think they're going to be interested. I think theoretically, yes. right, Mr. C? I think theoretically, yes, but I don't think they're gonna be interested, man. I really don't. I think they're gonna probably roll with Tyler Shue another year, right? They took him in the second round, which again ahead of Shador made no sense to me. But anyway, um, he's got a live arm. He's demonstrated, he's made some plays that have kind of galvanized the team, using his legs and sacrificing his body. Given the status of things, given the status of the draft class in terms of quarterbacks, Tyler Shue might be your day one starter. Like I said, you want him competing with someone. But if you bring in Kyler Murray, the expectation is for him to start. Unless like you said, unless the Cardinals are eating a ton of that cap, I think there are precious few situations where Kyler Murray could actually go and it actually net positive results. To be honest with you, and that's coming from a person who thought that Kyler Murray was among the top prospects in his class, in his respective class, being the first quarterback selected. So interesting stuff for sure. Interesting stuff for sure. All right. That's going to do it. That's going to do it for this edition of the second half draft show. Shout out, Mr. C. Mr. C, I hope you have a terrific New Year's, safe New Year's. I'm going to have a mock draft actually dropping on the main channel, Couch Potato General Manager, on the first. We've done a live stream. We'll probably just do a pre-recorded mock draft that day. There's a lot of content that I've been sitting on for months now for various reasons. I won't get into all of that, but certainly looking forward to draft season. So, Mr. C, again, have a great night. Happy New Year's to you. And we'll see you in a week. Take care, everyone. Bye.